what I found very annoying out in the ether is like people talk about taste and nobody goes deep on what that means. It's just like kind of very subjective, but it's not. I mean, this is what we were trained on in design school. And so this is something that we have to like bring back into the fold and actually tell people you can learn this because you're human and agents are not.
Welcome to the Generalista podcast, where we talk about the state of product design and UX in the age of AI. My guest today is Evelyn Kim, who leads design at Snowflake. A lot of her work right now lives in a question that many designers are only beginning to sit with, which is what happens to a designer's sense of identity, value, expertise when AI moves into the middle of how teams build. And she spent the last few months actually helping her team navigate through a lot of these changes. I should also tell you that Evelyn and I go back. We actually worked together at Uber Eats a little while ago. And she's one of the most thoughtful design leaders I've worked with about how she grows, develops, and cultivates her teams and her people. And it's sort of like that last part that I want to talk to her about in this conversation because, there's the technology around everything that's happening with UX design, but it's also about leading people through fear. So, Evelyn, welcome.
Yeah, I'm Evelyn Kim. So, as John mentioned, I'm head of product design at Snowflake. Been here for about almost 2 years. Most of my career was in consumer, and in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been in enterprise. And this has been an interesting time of major transformation, probably the biggest learning change I've experienced in my career here.
Well, we're going to get into that. So, you've led your team through a pretty big AI transformation, and I want to talk about all of that, the fear, the doubt, the stuff that you weren't sure about, in terms of whether it was going to work, because I think that that's the part that nobody really talks about, right? But it's what everybody is like living through, I think, on a day-to-day basis. So take me through the moment where you realize, hey, like, the old way of running design wasn't really going to survive, and what you've done since that realization.
Yeah, I think the transformation we went through, I think leading up to that change, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty going on. And I think that's the part that most people don't really work through. There's a framework that is called Let Chaos Reign and Before You Reign in the Chaos. It was written by Andy Grove, who was the former CEO of Intel. And he was describing a very disruptive time when they were going from hardware to software. So my team was going through all of that. We were realizing that tension which that keeps going between you're excited because you want to learn AI and it's doing some pretty amazing things in your workflow, but you're also terrified because you feel like you're going to lose what you're good at. And so underneath all of that, you're learning this new technology, but you're also trying to manage this identity, mastery, and status crisis underneath. And you spent your entire career building this capability, as a designer or researcher, and then it feels like it's getting taken underneath you, and that's kind of what's like kind of reverberating through the transformation. It doesn't go away, it's always there. So for us, we ended up having to do this pilot where we saw some clear bottlenecks in the process of building the old way and say, you know what, you need to just build to learn. That's it. Just build something and then learn as quickly as you can. And I think that was like the surprising things that everything that, we would go through the double diamond process of like discover, define, design, deliver. It compressed in 2 days and you can just build something tangible. And people were so blown away by that because they could see the immediate impact. They could just take the prototype and put it in front of the customer, like literally the next day. And I remember a customer saying they had this problem 2 weeks before, and then we showed them the prototype and we had launched it. And he was just amazed at the speed in which we could operate. We knew from that moment this was the way we were going to work.
That's a really cool, I think, little case study of how fast and how the velocity, right, of design right now is shifting radically. It sounds like you're still going through the same process, but it's getting compressed. But I want us to take a step back, which is that you said you kind of leaned into this idea of let chaos reign. So talk through that.
To me, it's just like you have to put on the beginner's mindset. You're a new hire, you don't know anything. So you're just curious and you're a sponge, you want to learn. You're a child who's learning ABCs in the sandbox. Like it's that type of curiosity where you're not wedded to history or past things and you're coming in fully, embracing whatever is coming your way. So that's what experimentation is just like let's just not follow a process. Let's just tinker and play with this. So our team, the way we tinkered was we went from using Figma to the next day we all got on Cursor. We all got access to the, development environment. And it was historically really hard to access. Just the onboarding alone for engineers was really difficult. But we got it, and we also made sure the PMs got access. So now we had this shared language of being able to push code into the actual production environment. We built a separate design prototyping repo because we needed things to kind of like battle test out our prototypes. We didn't want to send it out into production code quite yet. And so our design system team and design engineers built that. And that was kind of our playground for experimenting a lot of things. And then we also introduced our own internal coding agent called, formerly called Cortex Code, now called Coco, and it became our internal tool to like build everything. It was powerful because it knew everything about Snowflake, our data, our code base, our design system. So we had like a huge amount of different tools like that at our disposal, and we were building like a huge catalog of skills. And I think like what people really appreciated was just being able to, you know, try things out and learn from it, break things. And we kind of did away with the old process, which was very much, you know, a lot of stakeholder reviews and whatnot. We gave agency to the designers to make decisions and crit with their teams. And it was important to kind of empower them and give them agency because to me it was like priming them to think about the strategic judgment that they're going to have to exercise more. And if it was going to only be done by executives, it wasn't going to work. So I think that was pretty critical in kind of our experimentation phase. So we're still in the, chaos land, and we're about to rein it in because now we've learned what's the golden path for design, for PMs, for engineers, and we're kind of bringing it back together and saying, okay, how's this whole system going to work now?
That's really cool. So there's a lot there, but I think that one of the questions that I'm thinking about is sort of like this idea of craft and taste. Like I think a lot of design's authority is still rooted in that idea. But you're also talking about these tools that are maybe starting to do some of that craft, right? I think that taste is still, something that you can apply on top of that. But how did you help your team see value when these things are kind of getting collapsed in real time and AI is doing a lot of these things that previously was just, was just design's job, right?
I mean, I think once you got used to the tools and understood how to execute and kind of repeat some of that, then you start to scrutinize the quality. And so that came up next where they're like, wow, this technology is cool, but the quality is not there. And so how do we provide better guardrails without having to go back to an executive stakeholder review that's going to have to review every single thing? That's not what we wanted. So we also kind of approached it in a couple ways where we used agents to start to understand like kind of the principles of what quality looks like. And we looked at the beginning of the build process and at the end. So you had these agents kind of reviewing the work. And it was really meant for our cross-functional partners because they were also building alongside us. Everybody was building prototypes, not just design. 'Cause at one point, the designers were like, I already have taste. I don't need an agent. But when we double clicked on that, we said, like, okay, we have to put in the guardrails because the the idea was that the code base was going to get 3x bigger, 3x faster. There's no way an amount of humans can do that. So you need agents to kind of help with some of the scaffolding. I had just attended a talk with the head of design at Atlassian and Anthropic during Config, and they were kind of going back and forth about judgment and taste. And it's interesting because I think people confuse the two. Judgment is about what should we do? It's really about understanding what to build and what is the right product that customers want. Taste is about how do you decode what humans want? And The reality is, if you do judgment without taste, you're gonna create an efficient but really like a forgettable product. It's not gonna resonate. And then if you create taste without judgment, you create beautiful products that just don't scale. And so it to me, it's like very much what designers have always been in our practice been doing. And then when you look at taste alone, there's like three levels of taste that agents are not capable of really doing really well. The first level is like you look at the individual, what is their emotional taste and functional taste, like how should it work and what do people want to feel from it? And so agents are really good at that part because they're good at personalizing to whoever the end user is. But then you have to think about level two, which is like understand the collective. Like, do you understand the people around the person that you're building for? So that could be, in an organization, that end user is data analyst or they're in the data science team. And then the third level is the entire system, the organization they live in, or it could be the platform of your product as a
Mm.
whole. We tend to build tiny features, but if you're not building for the platform, then the whole environment is not cohesive either. And so at that third level, it's really about, system taste. It's also includes like, what do humans commonly believe is aesthetically pleasing and easy to understand? There's some basic principles there that, everyone kind of generally follows. And so I think trying to break that down with my team has been very critical because I think what I found very annoying out in the ether is like people talk about taste and nobody goes deep on what that means. It's just like kind of very subjective, but it's not. I mean, this is what we were trained on in design school, and so this is something that we have to like bring back into the fold and actually tell people you can learn this because you're human and agents are not.
That's really cool. So, like, part of the empowering, it sounds like what you've done with your team is you said, okay, like machines and AI are really good at these pieces. Humans are really good at these pieces. There's actually, there's a Venn diagram there, right? At some point, but this is how you cultivate that as a framework, right?
Yes.
And I think that that is like a really powerful way to empower your team. But there's also like, you're kind of like the design leader, you're pushing these frameworks, you're pushing these ideas. I imagine that your team has established ways of working. What did the response look like? Were there moments of fear that you had to like actively address? And who pushed back the hardest?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the beginning, people were paying attention to all the layoffs, hearing the jargon about agents are going to replace all the roles. And so people just stayed trapped in that mindset. But, they want certainty. So I think one of the things that was making them scared was not knowing what success looks like. And so trying to get as quickly as possible to like, what does success look like in this role? And the problem is like, it's literally changing every couple weeks because the technology changes. And, I had to be, in the beginning, I was very clear. I was like, we don't know yet. We're not going to know, but this is kind of where you have to be willing to explore, experiment, and lead with curiosity and then have some resolve, but then lead with curiosity again every couple weeks
Mhm.
and not feel settled that everything's going to have a finite answer every month. And for myself, that I didn't know what my future looked like, if I was going to have a job, if there was going to be design in the future. But I didn't let that fester too long. I think to me, it's like those things are always in the background. And when you have to do big changes, you have to be brave, and brave is always really good buddies with fear and uncertainty, and you just kind of have to accept them. Like it's always going to be there, so you're never not going to know what
Let's
to do.
let's talk a little bit more about that because there's this process that I think a lot of designers don't talk about, which is like, oh, I'm bringing these things to my team, right? Like I'm creating these frameworks, I'm creating this safety, I'm creating assurance, right? Where maybe there isn't, or maybe you have to project that. But you yourself are feeling that as well. And so before all of this stuff that you're that you're doing, you're thinking about, well, how can I make the internal change for myself and then bring that forward to my team? So how do you think about that work, the
Yeah.
internal work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing that for years now. To me, that's like all inner work, right? For me, my instinct, whenever I'm met with something that should make me terrified, I usually I just commit first to the mission. In this case, I had to help transform the whole design team in a matter of weeks, not like months or quarters. And before I can even process my emotions, I just commit first. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And then I think my emotions kind of catch up with me later after I've like kind of, it's that whole framework I have, like lead with curiosity and then get to resolve. And resolve is when you have to sit with the heavy realization of the decisions and like, how am I actually feeling about this? So when I do, I mean, I was definitely feeling uncertain, but I think giving myself some structure, what the next 30 days look like, gave me a good kind of foundation to work off of. And you got to control the controllables, like anchor on what you know, not what you don't know. And if you don't know something, get curious and go find that thing. So I think that was kind of the method to my madness. And also like nothing really scares me in my job, to be frank, because I feel like I've personally gone through a lot of more scary things personally that pales in comparison to any big career change. This is like history repeating itself, and that's the reality. But I think a lot of people, so whole identity gets tied up in their role, and it's hard to see some of that.
That's absolutely true. Did you have to do some of that kind of help, as you were working with your team, did you have to help them understand that, hey, like things are always changing? This is just part of a broader sort of like thematic change that we've seen many times. So like how do you help them understand the broader kind of shifts that are happening and how to navigate through that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to just not think too broadly when things are so uncertain, to think more short term and figure out like what's the one thing I'm gonna do great this week, one thing I'm gonna learn, and that should keep you going. And then I think being able to do this as a team, to like suck at something as a team and break things as a team. We had these like learning workshops almost on a weekly, bi-weekly basis where we all came together and we learned, how to commit the first PR. We're like, did not know how to navigate the code base. It was just wrought with so much problems. And I think being able to like sit next to your coworkers and go through that and say like, oh, you suck at this too. Great. I did the same problem, is an important part of the process. And that I think that energy also carries into feeling more engaged when you like lose together and win together. And that's an important part of, the driving force. Like don't do it alone. You got to do it with other people.
I love that. And so, there's sort of like this moment where the team moved maybe from a feeling of dread or like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job to engagement. Right. And, it sounds like you guys are kind of in that moment of engagement. And when you think back on that transition, it sounds like experimenting together, like being learners and beginners again together was part of that. But were there any other things that were kind of key for you and for your team getting to that, that turning point?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we were measuring everything for sure. So we knew exactly, our usage looked like over time. And I think that also like showing data and evidence of like how the entire team is working together is important. So we were measuring like weekly active usage on Cursor and Cocoa, weekly active usage on how fast did we iterate within between PRs, right? So the mechanics around that were important to tell the right story, in the business language that the company wanted. But I also think that behind all that, we were seeing massive momentum with the products we were shipping. It was actually significant in what we were witnessing. Like we were building this new capability with Coco and seeing that it was driving the growth and change within the company. And so I think that was critical, is that you can't do these things if the company is also not winning. If the company is losing, you're not sure if this method to this madness is worthwhile, right? So I think that's important.
How do you guys share as a team these kind of wins?
Yeah, I mean, we have, of course, we all communicate in Slack. And we were also doing a lot of smaller pod activities or brainstorms and breakouts. We had a group of people come together, our most like AI pilled designers and researchers came together and brainstormed, well, what did you take away from all the experimenting that everyone should actually adapt? And that was kind of our own design AI handbook. And then we turned that into a workshop that we go, step by step on how to build those capabilities in our workflows. So I think that's been helpful. We also have these bi-weekly AI show and tells with our, product org where designers, PMs, research, anyone can sign up, show like a little bit of what they were able to do that improved their and automated their workflow. And that was also great to see is your cross-functional partners doing the same thing and being inspired by people's creativity that way was really awesome. And I think that was a big part is like you realize everyone can be creative, not just designers. And I think that also adds to the energy and excitement people have about feeling that this learning process was important and it was working.
Totally. So, you know, this kind of moment of, the turn, right? Like everybody's using these tools, it seems to be working out. You're measuring what's happening, people are actually like pushing code, and you guys are doing PRs together and all that sort of stuff. But when designers and engineers and like PMs build together in code, are they actually aligning faster because they're explaining less and building? Like, what do you think is happening, right? Like, what's causing the speed change?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes and no. In the beginning, designers and engineers come together and they were working with the same tools and they were moving faster, but they were still hitting certain bottlenecks. And, when I investigated what the bottlenecks were, it was always the old, decision-making problem. Like someone didn't understand like how to decide which backend to use or which API to use. And those are like moments where you realize, human judgment still matters and it's still slow. And I was always curious about how do we make speed that up. And then what's interesting was the designers and engineers were also capable of doing everything completely end to end without collaborating. So you had designers, writing PRDs, putting that into the spec, building the cursor prototype, and then actually shipping the PR code, and the engineer would review, and then off it goes. And then vice versa, backend engineers were building interfaces and going all the way through independently. So it was interesting that there was sometimes even less collaboration because we could build everything end to end, and the collaboration moments happen through reviewing each other's work once it was done. But I think the challenge now is like how do you construct the cross-functional team again to come together? What does that collaboration look like, especially when there's dependencies with other teams? So that's still persistent, and we're trying to work through some of that right now, is to rebuild a product development process that allows for better collaboration. And I think part of it is that people tend to collaborate because they're missing information and they need to get it from someone. And so we're trying to figure out how do we build context that everyone has shared information to make decision making faster and collaboration feel more frictionless.
If that's the case, like why is cross-functional alignment important still? It's like if everybody can just do everything, why do you still need to work with an engineer? Why do you still need to work with a PM?
Yeah, I mean, I think the folks that would individually do things end to end is because they were able to build a feature within their domain. The moment that you go step out of that and you have to go integrate with other teams, platforms and all things, that's when the collaboration does matter. And I think the main thing that I had pointed my team to yesterday was that there's two archetypes that we have to think about. It's not no longer just PM design eng. It's one is called the coherency architect or whatever it might be. The second is the agency amplifier. And at the very basic level, the coherency architect is someone that has to collaborate because they are going to build the platform that pulls it all together, right? And there's people like this in every, function. Like a backend engineer has to think about the whole architecture of the experience. So the mental model I always tell them is like between these two, it's like you're an urban planner as a coherence like architect. You're trying to build the city and you're trying to build the roads and the zoning and the infrastructure. And then the agency amplifier is the guy who's like 0 to 1 designer. He's the architect that's just going to build this like hyper personalized house that's beautiful and meant just for you. But where does that house sit? Like, where in the city is that house supposed to sit is key. How do you get to that house? And so the idea is that you have to have both of these folks. You can't go one or the other.
Hmm.
What's really nice about the agency amplifier that I think a lot of, executives and even the industry talks about is like they're fast. They create momentum. Their goal is to get to discover value as quickly as possible. So it's very, very much in line what agencies are amplifying is that individual capability. And the coherency architect's job, if you think about a design systems person or platform designer, is that they're supposed to compound that value. They're supposed to scale that momentum. They're supposed to take what you uncovered and make it build it across the whole thing. And when you design a city, if you've never walked the street, you can't do that. You have to be able to understand the lay of the land of the city and be able to understand where this house is supposed to situate there.
Yeah.
So I think about collaboration that way. It's like it's really these two archetypes need to come together and figure out how to work together.
Well, what that made me think about is like, are people on your team becoming these two archetypal models in some way? And those are the two versions of builders that your organization is enabling, or does it look like something totally different?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of where things are landing. It's like we're noticed that people tend to index in one or the other, but I think you need to be able to exercise both skills at different times and be able to do each of those equally well. I don't think we're in a position to say we're going to hire for separately. I think we because of the way our organization is operates, we need people to be deployed anywhere at any given time to figure out coherency or figure out how to go fast, and build the time to value feature that's necessary there. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I think time will tell.
I mean, so what I'm hearing is, I think that these two archetypes are brilliant, but I also am thinking about, okay, the coherency architect, that's sort of like telescope out, look at the big picture. And then you've got the agency, what is it? The agency
Amplifier.
amplifier,
Yeah.
that's kind of like microscoping back down in and like applying like a focused, set of actions towards an output, right? People need to do both of those, right? And now also people are thinking, we're not just designing anymore. We're not just researching anymore. We're not just doing operations anymore. We're doing a little bit of all of those things inside of our organizations too. So you've got this kind of squishing together of different roles and functions inside of a single, individual or IC. And then you also have telescope, microscope, right? Like, how do you think about evolving your team to have all of those attributes?
I think part of it is through building the work, like doing the work. And the reason we even have those archetypes, because I was trying to illustrate to our teams, like, historically, we've all been more or less the agency amplifiers. We just build too many features and they're all disconnected. And so now we have to build for the coherence experience. And it's interesting to do it with AI and agents because they're good at doing the individual like personalized experience first, and then their context window cannot handle the coherence like needs and platforms. It's too much. So we're gonna like test it out and see how we can do that. But I think it's through that work of showing, we have to build a consistent experience. This is the artifact for that, and then who are the people that develop that, and now you've like built the muscle of how to do that well. So time will tell what that looks like, but we're in the thick of building for that experience.
I want to talk a little bit about what you think is worth protecting for designers in this kind of new world that we're all sort of stepping into and a part of right now. AI can now generate screens, it can generate code, but what's the thing that a human on your team does that you would actually like fight to protect?
I think the ability to develop the eye towards what good looks like and and also how to see people, our users, and as well as like how we collaborate with our team members. I think those two things are still very much what we will provide value on. I think that's, years of having a trained design eye and evaluating interfaces and picking up on the nuances and connecting that across. It's just like this ability to pattern match in the context of a lot of people and decisions that are flying past you every single day that no amount of AI can really figure out. Like their context window would have to be so massive to take all of that in. But I think it's important to just go back to like what's deeply human, what does behavior change look like? Those things are very much close to what we know, and I think that's the thing that I would protect and fight to make sure that we incorporate that into our product, because that's kind of at the end of the day, yes, there can be agents on the other side, but there is still a human being on the other side, and they will pay attention to which company, which culture of building actually cared about what they built and put that into the experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the old way of building, right? Okay, old way of building. I know that you're still using double diamond. I think that the foundation of how you build great stuff, I think, still doesn't change. It just maybe it gets a lot faster. But if you think about timelines, right? Like a typical timeline for really complex features sometimes would take 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer, right? That timeline is now getting compressed down into days, weeks, like 1 week. But is there anything that you like when you think about quote unquote the slow way of working, right, before AI, that you miss? Like, are there things that you kind of wish stayed the same?
I mean, I don't really miss it that much. Because I'm just naturally someone who likes speed. So I didn't like it when it was so slow, when you just think about the way products are built. But I do think that doing short windows of slow thinking is really important, like brainstorming and doing sprints and, coming together with your cross-functional team and doing the good old brainstorming, whiteboarding, all that. That to me is still important and critical. And that's where like a lot of great magical ideas happen, and not usually in the old process of the slow, drawn out thing that takes, quarters, years in the past to do.
Yeah, like war room, getting in with your whiteboards, doing the active collaboration,
Yeah.
all that sort. I love that too. How do you ensure that you keep that? Like what are you doing as a leader to cultivate some of those moments where you come together and you actually like do that real, you know, those moments of collaboration together and artifact building that doesn't exist on a screen.
Yeah, I mean, like we always have our usual design offsite. So we had one in March, and that's when I like bust out the old design sprint methodologies, and it's like I try to make it as super fun and interactive possible, because I think if you're having fun, you have those creative ideas, you have human connection, and that's when the juices start flowing. And people always like love that. Like I think when there's a deficit of that, and with all the AI tooling, you're just soloing it all the time. It can really deplete creative energy, and I think I always try to do index it far out there. So one of the days on an offsite, we always say no digital, no phones. We try to do something that's very human and just get to know each other as people. And to me, that's like very intentional, part of changing your brain pathology so that when you come back, you fired up a completely different part of your brain, so that maybe the ideas flow more and you have a ability to like understand the people around you and who to connect with to get things going.
Well, what popped up in my head too, just based on what you said, is when you get in those moments and you're actually like creating together and you're engaging, and maybe the artifacts are digital, maybe they're analog, it doesn't really like matter that much. You're having fun, right? Like you're just like you're jamming together, you're creating together, and I don't think that you know, no matter how agentic your processes are, you can't replace that, right? And I do think that the best products and the best certainly like the best outcomes come from teams that are having fun together. And so, are you thinking about that, like kind of more of these qualitative ways of creating outputs and sort of like building teams? Like how important is that now in your leadership style?
Yeah, I think trying to imbue some of that, at least week to week, it's up to everyone day to day how they're going to do that. But I think for us, the fun I see is usually through we have this like thing called 100 days of learning. I think it's the channel. So we have this separate Slack channel, and it was inspired by a designer named Tian Tian, she has this Instagram presence where she learned to illustrate in 100 days. She learned to paint in 100 days. She's now learning, AI, some sort of capability in 100 days and motion design. And her portfolio of all that work, where she actually committed to doing a little like 10 minutes every single day for 100 days, was so inspiring that we decided to do that. And it just so happens everyone chose very different things. At that time, I chose like 100 days of Figma Make because it was brand new and I wanted to learn how to use the tool. And other people chose 100 days of pottery and they just bust out pottery bowls every day or digital art. And I think it's always nice to kind of zigzag between I'm doing this feature work and I come over here and I see so and so is building this really cool thing that's just delightful. And it adds that like moment of delight. It's just like, wow, I want to do that too. And I think it's nice to see visibly people doing that and showing the work. It's always show, don't tell is kind of like the mantra that we learned at Uber. So we try to bring some of that into it. We have rituals around, food and meals. I think that's really important. We have our own CFO, the chief fun officer. So we try to bring some of that into the culture, but it's very hard to do that because I feel like AI has gotten us to become so incredibly busy
Hmm.
that it's hard to have that downtime to have those moments where you just to be a person and a human.
So carving out that space, I think, especially when there's always something that's crossing your desk, right? There's always some sort of output that you can assess or a decision that you could make. And I think that, in order to preserve maybe some of our humanness and sanity, we need to say, oh, okay, like it's okay to break. It's okay to like step back and have those moments of fun and to create that as a broader team structure as well. One quick question that I have, and I'd love your perspective on this. Is we've been talking about, okay, like designers are doing more now, but engineers are also doing more now, and PMs are doing more now, and honestly, like leaders are doing more now, right? Like leaders are stepping more into IC and actually like running projects. And but I'm curious, like when everybody is doing a little bit of these things, like what do you see? So like when a designer can write code, are they writing code like an engineer? Or does the design brain show up in some way that you're seeing that's kind of different? Or when an engineer is doing their thing and these teams are coming together, like how are you seeing this kind of everybody can build now, but we can only ship one thing, right? So how do these different lenses kind of come together? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are still building independently and everyone comes to like a meeting and shows their prototype. And some of them are interesting, some of them are, obviously not. They didn't think about the UI that much. And I think I think in what I've learned in some of the experiments I've seen is like we just give people a chance to like, launch it and get feedback from customers. And then they quickly realize that didn't resonate. Let's unlaunch it. So to me, it gives me quiet victory. It's like, yeah, you can't really depend on one single person to launch something really successfully. You have to have like a cross section of diverse thinking and diverse skill sets. That's going to make it more powerful. And including design too. Like I don't think you can depend on design to build something and launch it successfully. So it's nice to allow people space to do that, but then quickly learn from it and realize that's not the process. But you need to see that as evidence. You can't just mandate, like, you can't ship that because you didn't talk to me. Just like, let them ship it. Let's just at least get customer feedback. There's always something to learn. And then we'll, iterate on a better version. And that's kind of the mindset I want everyone to go in. It's just, I don't like the idea of like feeling territorial or feeling why wasn't, X included and all that stuff. It's just you got to trust your team that they're trying their best and they will take feedback, and sometimes not always, but that's okay. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Okay, there's going to be people listening to this that haven't gone through a lot of the transformations that your team has gone through, or but they might have a mandate to transform, or they know that they have to do this, right? If they're going to continue to kind of be in this space and to continue to do this kind of work, but maybe they're super anxious, right? They don't have a map. What do they do? We're recording this on a Friday. What do they do on Monday morning?
If they were giving the mandate to change in like a matter of weeks,
Yeah.
I I'd say, check in with yourself. Where are you at with this change? Write it down, tuck it away. And then I think it's important to also you know, think about what's going to happen 30, 60, 90 days. I wrote that document down not knowing what was going to happen by, day 30. And I look at, day 60, 90 and realize none of that mattered. It was all going to change anyway. But give yourself kind of a path forward, and it actually just helps codify what you need to figure out in the next couple weeks. And it gives you structure because sometimes you just need to put a little bit of guardrails for yourself so you're not feeling reactive to everything. And then I think it's also important to, start with the touchy-feely things, like check in with your team. Where is everyone at? What are they worried about? And have that dialogue on a consistent basis, like bring it up at every single all hands and allow people to have breakout groups to talk through it and learn from each other how they're doing. And I think they'll find quickly like a community of folks that are like, a kid in a candy store, like, this is the best thing ever. And they get curious, like, oh, tell me more. What happened? What did you do? And that's what they want to also see too, is just kind of the folks that are really excited and they tend to like lead the charge and they really help the other folks that might feel a little bit stuck in the mud about the whole change. But I think you kind of have to realize that you're not changing the tools, you're changing everyone's identity. If you understand that part, you got to really be careful about how you want to shepherd that along for your team.
And it's all of the things that we've been talking about, like letting chaos reign, and then all of the emotional stuff too. It's all part of creating that, right? Just a quick aside, like I love that you just let people ship stuff and like see what happens, and I think that that's part of the shift too, right? Like letting people make mistakes, letting people learn through action, letting people learn through doing, right? Okay, this is maybe a hard question, but I'm curious. Like, okay, you and I are both heads of design. I think that our roles are shifting daily. The way that we interact, the different telescoping and microscoping that we're doing personally. But like, let's imagine a year from now, or maybe even 2 years from now. Does head of design still exist? and,
Well,
and yeah,
provocative.
yeah, and if it does, who are we leading? Like does design still exist? Like does design still exist?
Yeah, somebody's got to guide the agents on how to produce good work. It's not just going to figure it out on its own for sure. And people's tastes constantly change. So it's how do you like funnel that? No, I think it still exists. It's just going to be very different. And it's starting to become very different. It's less about the artifacts, that we're creating. And to me, I've been telling my team ad nauseum that you guys are going to be system designers. That's really the key here is like, all of the experiential things that manifest in a UI also matter in like, you know, how an organization operates and how you set up the systems to allow agents to understand what good looks like. To me, I always felt that what was, even like 8 months ago, I sat down with a designer. I said, you're going to become a designer who manages synthetic designers. And they're like, what? It's like, well, I think it's probably going to be an agent that, is moonlighting as a junior designer, but that's what you're going to do. And to me, this is not any different. We've always been in the business of coaching people how to do the work. And this is, now it's humans and agents. And that's really what it's going to be for some time before it evolves again. But I think we have to assume that 80% of UI is just going to be executed by agents, and Our job is to teach them the fundamentals and guidelines of what humans want to see and how they want to interact and how they want to feel. And that's going to be mostly most of the job.
Yeah, everybody's becoming a little bit of a manager.
Yeah,
Maybe
whether you like it or
time
not.
is becoming a different kind of manager of a different kind. Again, I think you're absolutely right. All of these things are shifting so fast, but what I'm hearing is that as the technology and the way of working shifts, so are we, right? And there's always going to be a human in that loop somewhere. Well, Evelyn, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've learned a lot from you. I continue to learn a lot from you, and yeah, just this has been a fantastic session. So
Thank you so much for having me.